the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable Senate now resumes its sittings, and I apologize for the late start today. It's fairly unusual these days, but there it is, 11:33. Statements by ministers.
Mr. President, last week I made a statement to the Senate, a brief statement on a matter related to a case filed by the ACLU on behalf of 4 Jamaican citizens against the U.S. Coast Guard. And it has become clear that in the public domain, certainly, there is some uncertainty or lack of clarity around, I would say, one or two aspects of that statement. And I thought it might be helpful at this point to clarify. Before I make the specific clarifications, Mr. President, I wanted to state very clearly, once more, that the government of Jamaica and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in particular as well takes very seriously the protection of the rights of its citizens. Certainly, I can speak to, since I became minister, I remember one of the first major issues that we had to take on as a ministry was the issue of our treatment, or the treatment of Jamaican citizens on arrival in Trinidad. You recall persons were distressed to the point where people were calling for a full boycott of all Trinidadian goods. How is it that our people are not being treated with respect while it is that we are doing business with this country? And we pursued a diplomatic course of action, and we did so successfully. I think it is safe to say that now, while it is not while we don't have perfection in free movement of citizens, we certainly have fought for the protection of the rights and appropriate treatment of our people within CARICOM across the board. We have significantly reduced, if not eliminated, the complaints of mistreatment on arrival and unjustifiable denials of return or denials of entry. And that is the work of the ministry in action, the protection of our rights, of the rights of our citizens.
On a point of order,
sure.
Would you be able to share your statement with us at this stage? The last week you read it from a device. Have you got a printed copy so that those of us of this statement, so that we could now have the benefit of it?
I'm speaking extempore, as you would have realized, but I will pull things together and circulate. And please allow me. While there are circumstances which lend themselves to a pre-prepared statement which can strictly be printed, delivered, verbatim and circulated, I know that there have been circumstances where even I have printed a statement but then supplement extempore, and this has caused some concern for yourself included. Why is this not there, etc.? So, Mr. President, and it is not provided that a statement cannot be given extempore, or even that it must be provided. So I will ask for the understanding of this chamber, and I will provide the written statement in a manner which will not only pull together what I have typed, and again, we're moving with the times. Reading from a device is perfectly appropriate, but the yes, no. I am speaking about it, but that's what I'm now saying is not written. It's not written, but I can type it as I will recall it. But Mr. President, our efforts in respect of the protection of the rights of our citizens did not end in Trinidad. I recall as well, just last year, our efforts to return 28 fishermen who had fallen into distress and were taken to Colombia. Mr. President, when I recall myself and team members being up at 3:30 in the morning, making sure that the arrangements that were in place for the persons who were making sure that they were in safe, warm, and dry surroundings. Remember, we don't have an embassy where they were found and transported to. Making arrangements to ensure that while we were having difficulties repatriating them because of the number, the cost, and all of the verifications of nationality, that they were kept protected. That's the work of the ministry in protecting our citizens when they are in distress overseas. So where it is, and when they were brought home, everyone celebrated it, including the men. And I just want to say that it, again, typifies the fact that when persons seek to position whether me or the ministry or the administration as not caring about the rights of our citizens overseas, it is way off course. It is just unjustified. Mr. President,
you can't understand if you don't listen.
Mr. President, I think it's also important for me to clarify, and this is specifically in relation to the statement I made in Senate last week. Sorry. So I said that the ministry only became aware of the case in relation to the allegations of abuse, the allegation. I'm not quoting myself. Settle down, settle down. We have a long day. Settle down. Sorry, Mr. President. Mr. President, what I have said and what I intended to communicate was the fact that the ministry only became aware of the allegations of mistreatment and abuse when the case filed against the U.S. Coast Guard in respect of those matters was brought to public attention. It is clear that persons did not understand me as clearly as I would have wished or I would have hoped. I am heartened to note that even
No. Senator Brown, you're going so nice.
I'm heartened to note, Mr. President, that even the lawyer who represents the gentleman has acknowledged that not only was it possible that the Jamaican government did not know about the allegations until they brought the matter to public light and to the world, but he also acknowledged that this was what I had said. So that gives me some comfort. And also other persons have said they understood. But be that as it may, it's my responsibility to clarify, and that's what I'm doing today. as I intended to communicate then, the ministry became aware of the allegations of abuse and mistreatment for the first time when the matters were made public. Yes. I want to make clear as well, Mr. President, that when my statement set out that we had our records, my further statement indicated that we had no records of any complaints being made by the men or by their families. This was not intended to ascribe blame. And the language is quite clear as set out, that there was no blame ascribed. What I sought to do was to point out the times at which the ministry in its operations would normally become aware of a need for consular assistance, where persons report it, where they seek assistance on a deportation, when they complain to the consular officer that does the interview for the issuance of the emergency travel certificate, which happens when they verify nationality, and on their return. That none of those 3 points, or the families, did the ministry become aware. And it's not unusual for us to come by information in that regard. We have had circumstances where ordinary Jamaicans come into the ministry to make a report, or they call, or if they go to national security, that they send them to foreign affairs, or if they go to the police, they send them to foreign affairs, because they recognize that if the person is missing overseas, that is we are the place that would help. So again, this was not to ascribe blame, it was simply to note and to underscore that we really did not know. So I want to also make clear that when I say that we did not know, we say we did not know about the allegations of abuse. Now also in the Senate, Senator Knight had asked whether the matter was a shipwrighter matter. And I said that I was making inquiries on the matter. I was able to verify that I could confirm that they were deported to Jamaica in 2018, because that was where I had reached in my inquiries and verification. I couldn't verify anything else. When the men were deported to Jamaica, persons may be interested to know that they were deported on a regular charter flight, regular monthly charter. They did not engage with the consular officer together as a group. It was individually and on different days. They did not come to us at that point as persons who had been detained as a group or in circumstances related to detention on the high seas. None of that information came to the Consulate General. So at that point, when the matter came to public office, the first call was to the Consular Department to say, do you know of this? Has this been reported to us? No. Next point of call was to the Consulate General in Miami. Inquiries reflected that these names were in fact persons who had been deported. We could confirm. Did they report any mistreatment? No. We were able to not only confirm that from a lack of record, but from speaking to the specific person who conducted the interviews. Spoke with him. He said no mistreatment. And I said, and again, this is not with ascribing or making a judgment as to the reason that they would not have. That is not for us to say. But when I have asked him, so have people reported when you are doing these interviews? Have people reported to you the persons who are being returned? Have they complained to you before? And he says all the time. We're Jamaicans. We complain. That's what we do. Complain about everything. And they have protocols. They have protocols. They have protocols that follow up where complaints of mistreatment are made. But I'm not making any judgment call on the circumstances which may have driven them, to not complain at that point. And they certainly would not be constrained to only complain at that point. I simply share the facts to ensure that not only the Senate, but the public is aware that when I stated that the ministry was unaware about the allegations, and when I stated that I could not confirm, I was making inquiries as to whether this was a matter related to Shiprider, I was legitimately so doing. You would know that those sensitive matters are not kept in the consular department. Matters related to maritime security, Shiprider. Well, they might not have been in your time, but they certainly are now not. They're treated, nope. No, I'm not appealing to you. You know what? I think you're right. I think I will not look at you. Won't add value to my day. But Mr. President, I make these points simply to clarify the circumstances and to try to make clear so people understand. Because while there may be people who see political value in trying to position this matter in a particular way, it is actually important to the ministry that the facts are placed before the people and are placed on the record of the Senate. I was not able to do so last week, so I seek to clarify now. Mr. President, further to the comments which I've just made, I want to also just sort of broaden the context a little bit. And this is therefore taking the matter beyond.
How are we supposed to function as a Senate when you won't allow the minister to say to leave the comment? How can we function as a Senate in this way?
Can I take a point of order on being accused of lying? Can I, Mr. President, are the privileges accorded to senators being abused when I am to be called a liar while on my feet, Mr. President? Can I bring that point of order?
Senator Brown and Skeffrey, the minister is entitled to be heard. Could I ask you to just contain yourself so that you can give the statement? It is also, hang on a minute, wait a minute. It is also unacceptable for anybody to be shouting across the aisle one way or the other that someone is lying. It is unacceptable. So please allow the minister to continue.
President, you just called me and I want to be clear. I said the minister was nervous because she appeared nervous, and certainly to me, I do not believe what she's saying. So I want to make it clear. That's all I was conveying to her.
Minister,
that she needs to take a break. Because she's nervous. And maybe there's a reason for the nervousness.
No,
they sold out the Jamaican fishermen.
Mr. President, there's a consistency in what Senator Brown does. He rises, and instead of giving a point of order, he uses the opportunity to repeat the nonsensical verbiage. What we're asking, Mr. President, is to at least be able to listen to the minister with respect. And I cannot hear. Nobody can hear.
Thank you, Senator
It's
Charles.
a sort of-
Minister, would you...
President.
Just listen.
President,
Lies, wicked, sellout. No, but I get, Mr. President, with the greatest of respect, Mr. President, in this Honourable Senate, senators are not permitted to impute improper motive, to use offensive language, and to do exactly what Senator Brown and Senator Skeffrey are trying to do. I ask, Mr. President, that we afforded an opportunity to listen to the minister without this disrespect. And it is consistent. Time after time after time, once minister rises, there's a direct disrespect from Senator Brown against her. The first time I said,
Senator
Mr.
Brown.
President,
I wish that withdraw.
No,
I've
Senator
not been
Brown.
disrespectful
Senator
to them.
Brown. Lies, wicked, and sellout. That's what you just shouted across the floor a while ago.
Those are adjectives being used by the citizens of Jamaica.
Yes, I'm not concerned. I'm not concerned. Look here.
I am repeating what you said.
Let me tell you something. 1 minute.
I do not ascribe it to anything.
and now you're lying on Jamaica.
1 minute.
Now you're lying on Jamaica.
Senator Brown.
Lying on
Senator
Jamaicans.
Brown. Senator Charles. Senator Brown. A lot of things are said. A lot of things are said in Jamaica. Because they are said in Jamaica does not require or permit you to come here and repeat it. And you sit there and shout across the aisle, lies, wicked, and sellout. And I'm ruling that that is unparliamentary and do not repeat it.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator Croft.
With due respect, Mr. President, the same argument was put just a second ago, an accusation of lying by Senator Charles, that Senator Brown was lying. So if there should be any equity in the House, Mr. President, that he must also be.
You will, Senator Crawford, you will recall when I was speaking, I was referring to it going both ways, all right? So I'm going to ask the minister to continue, and in the normal course of things, persons are entitled to ask questions at the end of the presentation, and I will permit it. But I'm not going to permit the hurling of abusive, unparliamentary language across the floor. I heard it already, and if it's done again, I will impose sanction. Senate Minister, continue, please. Don't think so. So if you don't think so, do it again.
Mr. President, please.
Senator Knight, you're on your feet. Senator Knight is on his feet. He's entitled to be heard.
President, I'm going to appeal as an elder that don't cause the kind of discourse that is coming from one side to draw you into a situation where it appears as if you are giving a threat. That's not how you operate. That is not how you operate. And so I would appeal to those who are really trying to cause you to lose your cool in protection of them, not to draw you into this.
Minister, you're going to continue?
Thank you, Mr. President. As I was indicating, Mr. President, further to the comments which I've just made, in respect to our respect for and promotion and protection of the human rights of our citizens, as well as our knowledge of the circumstances, or rather our knowledge of the case related to allegations of abuse and mistreatment, I want to just speak a little more broadly, having clarified those points. And Mr. President, I feel the need to do so, of course, because of comments that have also arisen in the public domain in relation to this bilateral agreement between Jamaica and the United States, which is commonly known as the Shipwrighter Agreement.
The private memo.
Mr. President, Jamaica's maritime space is 100,000 kilometers. That's 25 times the size of our land space. Jamaica does not have the financial nor infrastructural capacity to police these waters, to monitor this maritime space. And accordingly, it has been helpful for us to partner with regional and international partners in order to address our very real issues with maritime security. The challenges in respect of the trafficking of drugs, the trafficking of guns, and the trafficking of guns for drugs are real, and they affect the level of violence and crime which we experience in Jamaica. It's an important issue for us to address. And I have to make the point, especially as the term sellout has been noted or has been used.
Mr. President, Mr. President, point of order. I thought you said the word sellout is unparliamentary. If it's going to be allowed to be used by one side.
I didn't.
If it's going to be allowed by one side, I hope you're going to allow me also to use it.
I did not. Senator Brown, you are well aware, and I can tell by the smirk on your face, that the word in itself is not offensive. It is the use of the word, use of it. Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, indeed, it is important for me to clarify that the circumstances that I've just laid out, that it is important for us to partner in order to address our maritime security issues, was in fact noted by both Peter Bunting in the House of Representatives when he was Minister of National Security, when he piloted the amendment to the Maritime Drug Trafficking Suppression Act in 2015. And that is the amendment, Mr. President, that actually gives the Minister of National Security the express right to waive jurisdiction to prosecute its citizens, subject to the advice of the Attorney General. That is the amendment, Mr. President. It was brought to this Parliament by then Minister of National Security, Peter Bunting, and was then piloted in this Senate by then Senator Mark Golding as Minister of Justice. Mr. President, I just wanted to remind us of the circumstances under which these points have been recognized. And I want to also remind, as you yourself might recall, Mr. President, that when the issue of the amendment to grant the right to waive jurisdiction for prosecution was brought to this Senate, the Jamaica Labour Party senators who were then in opposition all voted against, Mr. President, called for a divide and voted against because of concerns that were held. But that being said, Mr. President, what falls to us now, and certainly as has been brought into focus by the case that has come forward, is what can we do to strengthen the protocols for implementation of the Shipwrighter Agreement. Mr. President, in these circumstances, I can advise that we have, and I've indicated that we have started discussions with the United States authorities. And they have committed to send a delegation to travel to Jamaica to sit, to work through what we can do better to protect the rights of our citizens and ensure that the concerns which have been raised, and I make the point, again, not ascribing judgment, but simply stating the facts, that at this point there are allegations which remain to be proved, and that we therefore have to speak about them responsibly. It's fine for persons to discuss them in a relaxed manner in the public domain, but as minister and as a representative of the government, it's important that I respect that process, and I treat it sensitively. I treat it with the importance that it requires, and where it is that persons seek to position this in a negative light for political opportunism, I think it's unworthy of the use of this platform given here in the Senate. But Mr. President, we are also therefore calling together all the ministries, departments, and agencies that have responsibility for any activity at any stage of implementation of the Shipwrighter Agreement, so that we can ensure that we have a cohesive position on the ways in which, or the possible ways in which, we can ensure that the rights of our citizens are protected, even as we work with partners to ensure that our waters are effectively policed to protect us here from the guns and the drugs. Yes. Mr. President, we're also reaching out to the fishermen so that we can hear firsthand their concerns in relation to their experiences. And this sets the context within which we go forward, Mr. President. I have also recommended to the Prime Minister, and he has accepted my recommendation, that once we have held these meetings, that we will brief the opposition through the National Security Council, where matters of this sensitivity can appropriately be discussed. So, Mr. President, I share these actions and these intentional actions so that we're quite clear that the matter is being treated seriously. The sensitivities that I've raised are also real, and I ask this chamber to respect that as well. But where I can bring clarity to the Jamaican people and to this Senate, I am committed to so doing, as I have now attempted so to do. Mr. President, I thank you.
Senator Knight.
Thank you, President. I almost feel that I owe the Senate an apology, because it is my intervention that has caused all of this, and the contribution of my colleague Senator Lambert Brown. And when I raised this issue, I never thought that it would occupy airspace, television news, and newspapers, and social media for an entire week. I never thought so. And when Senator, I am responding to you.
He's entitled to respond to you.
No.
Senator Brown, what is wrong? Talk to her.
Yes, she is.
Calm down. Calm down. The minister, the senator asked a question. Calm down.
She knows the answer. She knows. Being disingenuous.
Minister.
She knows the answer.
The member is entitled to ask a question. No doubt what is happening is a run-up to the question.
No, as I understand it, you have said it over and over, that when a statement is made by a minister, then the person...
With the portfolio responsibility response. I'm aware of it. So proceed now, please. Senator Brown, I don't need you to tell me how to do my...
You don't need me to tell you, but last week you were second her side.
Okay.
No,
Senator.
No, sir.
Senator.
Let me just explain something.
No.
What I'm saying,
Senator Knight.
President, please allow me. You usually do.
But, and perhaps on this occasion, I'm just going to indicate to Senator Brown, even though you're on your feet, that I consider that very offensive. I consider it offensive.
If you consider offensive, I withdraw it. But I recognize that last week
Senator
you
Knight,
were telling
continue.
her not to answer certain questions.
Senator Knight, continue, please.
Man, so far from simply rising to ask questions, I am exercising the privilege to respond and also to ask questions. And my response is there. I have listened to you, Minister, and there's a gossamer that you have woven, through which I find it difficult to penetrate. Last week, you gave a statement as a minister. And I rose to ask you a simple question, which was, having regard to that which you have already been briefed on, and I'm quoting, where did this incident commence? So let me pause there. I wanted to know how it began, because I was aware that there's a process. So I wanted to know where. Was it within territorial waters? or on the high seas. That was what that was asking. It had nothing to do with any lawsuit. Let me go on. Then I said, and was it from your information in breach of any agreement between the United States of America and Jamaica? Familiar as you were then and you are now with the provisions of the law and the treaty, it must have been clear to you that I was dealing with the treaty and therefore the law. And then I said, if so, which agreement? Having regard to your involvement, you must have known that I was speaking about the ship rider. You must. Then I said, and what steps do you intend? And I changed it from the personal and said, does the government of Jamaica intend to take as between the two states at the diplomatic level? That is clear. Any Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade would, as you must have, understood me to have been dealing with a treaty situation and enacting legislation and dealing with it through the diplomatic channel. No one who could have been listening to that question could have thought by any stretch of the imagination that I was asking about a law case. None. And you clearly not believing I was asking about a law case responded to the question. This is what you said. Mr. President, we are not in possession of any information which would allow us to answer the questions posed by Senator Knight. Pause. That's not true. That is a false statement. You were. We, speaking on behalf of the government of Jamaica, the Minister of National Security was aware. Because it is the Minister of National Security who responded to the call from the treaty state. And it is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to your certain knowledge, because there was correspondence that was addressed to you about this matter that had nothing to do with the law case. So you knew. And, Minister, when you said that, you must have been conscious that what you said was not true. And then,
Mr. President, I think that it is appropriate because the member has said, and not the motive imputed to the minister, and has deliberately said that she's lying. And I think that is inappropriate, and I'd raise a point about it to object to it.
President, I'm merely using a document, an official document of the Senate, and I am entitled to draw conclusions from that. And I have carefully avoided using offensive language like lying. And I have put it in the acceptable language that it is not true.
What I would like you to do is recognize that you have a custom developed whereby, as the relevant person responding to a statement, you are entitled to go beyond merely asking a question. But could I ask you really to deal with the matter in the terms of asking the minister a question?
No, with respect.
Mr. President,
No, I'm not
Mr.
doing
President.
it. I'm not.
1 minute.
Because,
1 minute, Senator
and
Knight.
the reason why...
One Senator
At
Knight.
a point of order,
1
Mr.
minute,
President.
No, 1 minute. One Senator Knight.
The reason why I am not. This matter has caused a great deal of public concern. And it arose from a question I asked. And interpretations are being given in the public about whether or what was the subject matter of the questions. And a representative of the government, through a minister, went on a public medium and made the point as to what the minister meant. And it is my obligation to use the documents to help the public to interpret whether or not that is what the minister could have meant.
Mr. President,
Mr.
President, with respect, there's nothing in the document that indicates that the minister was not speaking the truth. Whether the member call it not speaking the truth or call it lying is the same imputation. It is similarly incorrect. And I say, with respect, it should not be permitted that I can get up and accuse Senator Knight of saying things and doing things and say is not true. And sit down like that.
You wouldn't do
but
that.
You shouldn't do it. You know better.
No, the evidence is... You wouldn't do that because you would have no platform from which to do it.
Senator Knight.
I have a platform.
Senator Knight. Senator Knight.
Yes.
Senator Knight. The standing orders are clear. The
That
minister has made a statement, and you are entitled to ask questions about it.
Thank you, sir.
So that's what I'm asking you to do.
I am doing that.
No, you're not. You're really making a
The
statement.
minister came. The minister last week spoke without a document being presented to decide. I raised the point because let me finish.
No, just continue.
No, let me finish. Because when ministers make statements, they are not supposed to veer from the written document. And that written document that they bring, is supposed to be prepared by the ministry. That has been... The minister did not do that last week. And she hadn't done it this week.
So you heard the statement. So could I ask you to continue, please? And you are permitted by the standing orders.
Speech.
You are permitted by the standing orders to ask appropriate and relevant questions.
And to respond. And I am going through this diligently. Who it hurts is going to get hurt.
let's talk about hurt President, I have raised a point of order. You have not ruled on it, and I'm insisting because I think it is wrong. If you tell me I'm wrong, I'll take my seat and keep my seat. But I don't think it is appropriate for the member to accuse the minister of being of not speaking the truth. And in my view, there's no basis for it. And even if there is, it's inappropriate. And I'm asking you to rule on it.
You know, I didn't say she's not speaking the truth. I said she must have been conscious. I said you must have been conscious that that was not the truth. That's what I said.
What I will do, Senator Knight, for the purposes of this the point of order raised by Senator Bram, just refer you to section 35. 5 of the standing orders that says no member shall impute improper motive to any other member of either chamber. I don't need anybody shouting at me and asking me. I'm addressing Senator Knight.
Yes.
I'm addressing Senator Knight and I'm reminding him of the relevant standing order and asking him to proceed.
And President, you will have observed that I didn't impute a motive. I didn't impute a motive. I never said that the minister was not speaking the truth because of so and so. I gave no reason. So I did not.
Thank you, Senator Knight. So continue now, please.
Right. So I have not run afoul of it. Now, the minister went on to say, after having said, we are not in possession of any information which would allow us to answer the questions posed by Senator Knight. And I remind you that the questions related to treaty, shipwright agreement, and diplomatic intervention. That's what it related to. And she said, and would simply note that we continue to inquire about the matter, as I have said, both from government agencies and through our consulate, to find out the circumstances that I indicated. The only issue on which we are clear regarding what you just raised is that the matter took place in Haitian waters. Now I'm perplexed. I don't know how to describe that, because I don't want to run afoul of the standing orders, and I don't want to offend personally anybody. But when it is said, the only issue on which we are clear regarding what you just raised is that the matter took place in Haitian waters, I find that odd. Because you ought at least to have been clear that there was a request made to board a Jamaican vessel, search the vessel, and if necessary take into custody Jamaicans, and therefore deprive Jamaicans of the right to due process under the Jamaican Constitution and law. You must have been, because from all indications, you and the ministry that you have portfolio responsibility for, you were both involved in the initial process of granting permission to the treaty state to board the Jamaican vessel. So what is said here could cause me, hopefully a reasonable person, to conclude that at the very end, I'm going to put it, least what you said was inaccurate. And if it was inaccurate, it behoves you to correct it. You're human. You're human. So you may have...
So Senator Knight, just put it in the form of a question, please, so the minister can respond to it.
I put it... Would you agree that what you said to the Senate on June 14 in connection with, in relation to a question I asked, your response was inaccurate? And and would you agree that that inaccuracy should never have occurred because of your personal involvement in the initial stage of the incident? And would you apologize to the Senate and to the country for that answer, or those answers, which were capable of misleading the Senate and the public? Those are the questions in relation to that. Then you said that, Senator,
why?
What you remember the question? Would you be willing to apologize to the Senate and the Jamaican public for the inaccurate statements that you made, which were capable of misleading both the Senate and the public? I pause.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Knight. Minister.
I only
This statement was not inaccurate. I did not have the files that connected the individuals directly to that were involved in the ACLU case, directly to the circumstances that would have come through the ministry at that time when I made that statement. That I had been involved before, 2 years before, is not false. The comment that you make. That I had been involved 2 years before. But these matters do not happen through me necessarily. They happen at different levels in the ministry. And when I said that I was making inquiries to get the information, and I was walking you through the path of my inquiries so that you would understand that it was only after that I would have received the file and been able to assure myself that the persons who had in fact been deported separately and individually, which is why I was trying to sensitize you to the distinguishing features of this case, that the persons who were being viewed as a group and the matter that had been brought to my attention were not immediately apparent and verifiable. But I have subsequently done so. Which is how I am able to. So no, I'm not prepared to apologize, and no, the statement when I made it was not known to be inaccurate.
Thank you, Senator Knight. Let her finish now. Okay. Are you finished, Minister? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Jamaican public, please understand this. That what the minister said was, Mr. President, we are not in possession of any information which would allow us to answer the questions posed by Senator Knight. It is a matter for you, not for me, as to whether you believe her or not. And I want to remind you, members of the public, that the question I asked related to that which took place at the commencement of this incident and the waiver of jurisdiction by Jamaica and the ship rider agreement. And I want you, members of the public, to understand that the Minister of Foreign Affairs played a role in that. We have no, and then she said Haitian waters. We have no other information at this point in time other than what has been sent out in the case document. Members of the public, you need to question that.
Yeah. What you knew then?
President, you need to question that, because it is not what was sent out in the case document that deals with treaty obligations and diplomatic approaches. It was what the response was from the Minister of National Security, how it was communicated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and how it was dealt with by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There's a process. Can the minister deny that a letter was written directly to her concerning this matter before June 13th, 2019? What was that letter about? What was the response given? And what diplomatic moves were made?
Two questions.
Pause for that.
It's not easy to read. It's a button.
Is that? Take.
Pardon?
Do you, as Minister,
June 13, 2019.
to Mrs. Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade? Yes. In connection with this matter, before June 13th, what was the letter about and what was the response? And what diplomatic action taken?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to make clear that no letter was sent to me regarding any allegations of mistreatment in respect of fishermen. No, allow me to answer. No, allow me to answer. Allow me to answer.
Senator Knight.
Allow me to answer.
Minister, 1 minute. Senator Knight.
Question.
Senator Knight.
No, sir.
Senator Knight. No, Senator Knight. Let the minister answer the question. Hold
I
on.
asked-
If you have a difficulty with the answer, then you
No,
ask another
President,
one.
please. I asked the question.
It's a quick question.
Answer the. You know why? You know why I'm so insistent? This is what happened last week. When I asked about ship rider, she started to talk about sensitive case.
Senator Knight, if you don't like, if there's an issue with the answer, then raise it at the end of the answer. But let her answer the question. Let the minister answer the question. Minister, answer the question, please.
The reason, Mr. President, that I make the clarification is because there has been confusion in the public's mind when this term, the matter, is used. And I want to be clear, because I don't want it to arise again or to be spun or misconstrued or even positioned incorrectly. That what was brought to my attention, that yes, I can confirm that a letter was written to me regarding a request for waiver of jurisdiction before June 13, of course. I said that that happened in 2017. No, last week, the question was not about what I said last week. The question was just this, about a letter. Mr. President. And that's exactly why I had to position my answer like that, because there is a deliberate effort, it appears, of some to try to confuse about what is being said. So pardon me, Mr. President, for just being clear that there was no letter sent to me in respect of any allegations in respect of human rights abuses or mistreatment in respect of Jamaican citizens who are subject to a suit against the U.S. Coast Guard. What I had received in what was sent to me addressed to me in 2017 was a request to waive, or an authorization rather, to waive jurisdiction, a request that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade communicate that the Ministry of National Security would waive jurisdiction for prosecution on the advice of the Attorney General, subject to certain conditions. The letter asked that this be communicated to the U.S. authorities who had requested said waiver. Okay? So, again, I make the distinction, Mr. President, because what I indicated last week was that I was not in a position, and I was not in a position because I could not make a direct correlation between the issue that was in the public domain and the specific question that Senator Knight had asked. I could not until I had seen the files. Thank you.
The question I had asked last week related to whether or not this was related to any agreement and whether it had been breached. So is the minister prepared to is the minister prepared to say that because of the effluxion of time and the memory loss last week, she was not in a position to connect the waiver that had been granted to her knowledge with the incident in the Haitian waters? Is she prepared to concede that there was a memory loss and an inability to make the connection, and so her answer was inaccurate? Is she prepared to accept that?
I'm not prepared to accept that my answer was inaccurate. It was accurate. I was not in possession of the information at the time. I was, however, as I just said, unable to make a connection, a correlation, as I just said, between the incident, which was in the public domain, the allegations of mistreatment, and the circumstances that resulted in the detention of the men.
Thank you. That is a matter to be. The acceptance or rejection of that answer will go far beyond your colleagues. So you said, we have no other information at this point in time other than that what has been set out in the case document. When you said that, you had no other information. Was it based on research? And the research turned out that there was no other information other than the case document. Was it based on research?
Minister, President, on a point of order, the issue that I have is that the questioning appears to me to be related to a previous statement and not the statement today. And I don't think that that is appropriate. And I am on a point of order. The questions are being asked about a statement made last week. A statement, this particular last question in particular, and a statement was made this morning, and the question is, questions are to be related to the statement before you at this time. That's the point of order.
In fairness, it is the minister that drew the connection between the previous statement and the statement today. I don't need your approval, Senator Skefford. So just, Senator Knight, just continue for me, please.
So, did she answer the last question? No, listen, I am in my 70s. I am in my 70s, so I can have memory loss. But when I was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, I never had memory loss.
Mr. President, as I indicated, I had started making inquiries. They started with the Consular Department. They then led to the Consulate General. Requests were made for the relevant files. At the time I spoke, I did not have them. And therefore, my response was based on the process that I was following to make inquiries, which I stated on several occasions last week.
The matter is before the court, the minister said, and we therefore have to be quite sensitive about how we address those things. Mr. President, I didn't ask her about any court matter. She upbraided me in the end. That, I have my reasons and the government of Jamaica has to consider it in this context and so on. As I said then, the matter is in court in the United States of America. Whilst I understand your approach at sensitivity, the fact is that quite apart from a legal issue, there is an issue which would arise as between the relationship between states, and that has nothing to do with the legal issue pending in the United States of America. And then there was some intervention by learned Mr. Senator Robert Nestor Morgan. But those objections faded away. I asked her something as urgent as this from yesterday morning at least, and you come here and you don't even know, you haven't even looked at the shipwrighter agreement, and then a whole lot of things.
So the question, Senator Knight?
She said she came here to clarify what she said last week. That is what she said. I'm not in a courtroom. And if I were in a courtroom, she wouldn't be as comfortable as she is now. You don't believe it? Wait for the experience.
Mr. President, I think that that sounds to me like an attempt at intimidation, Mr. President. I'm sure senators are not allowed to try to intimidate other members.
Senator Knight. Senator Knight. Senator Knight. Move on for me, please.
President, from the answers given by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the statements made by her last week and this week, two things emerge clearly.
Which you are going to ask questions about.
Which I'm speaking about, as I have a right. The minister, the one? Pete sent me a picture of yourself and himself. Yeah. Pete knows that I am fair, but when you try to slip, then unless you slide, you aren't trying to, but you are doing it without trying. Pete can't intervene now. It's bigger than me and Pete. It's above you. Minister? It is odd, very odd, that as involved as you were and as your ministry was, when the question was posed to you and you put it within the realm of court case and you didn't know anything about it, it would be peculiar if it was a simple memory loss. Minister, when you said that when it is reported on your behalf, and you seem to have adopted it, that it is the sensitivity that caused you to have been as cautious as you were. As cautious as you were, then that's not borne out by the questions posed and your answer. Last week I made the comment that there was inefficiency. This week I add there was negligence, there was inefficiency, there was a don't care attitude, and it has ended with a gossamer being woven. This web that you have sought to produce has an apt description. This web that you have woven, this web that you has opened, will be, that's why it's a web of deceit. I haven't said that. I don't have to because I don't want to. I said that. Of course I know what I'm doing. What, you think I don't know what I'm doing? I know what I'm doing.
Senator Knight, address me.
And I'm going to tell you something
Senator
further.
Knight, Senator Knight.
I'm going to
Senator
tell you
Knight, could I ask you to tell Mr. Brown when the two of you go downstairs later?
Yes.
And just address me. And if you have another question to ask, Senator
Yes, but
Johnson
I'm
Smith,
just going
you
to
could
finish
just
out
ask.
by letting the public know what I am doing. What I am doing, President, is to bear the facts before you, the Senate, and the public for a decision to be taken at an appropriate time as to whether, one, any standing order was breached, and two, whether the public should call that consequences be attached to the responses that were given by the minister.
So the questions you're asking are questions you're asking of the public.
I am here on the public's behalf. I'm not here on behalf of the PNP. I am here because I am here because the PNP appointed me. The PNP. It's the PNP that caused me to be here. But once I am here, then I now have to look to my public responsibility. Some of them over there, all of them over there, they are appointed by labor right. It's labor right appoint you.
Senator Knight, come now, man, just stick to the script and let's move on. Come now, please.
When they steal my time, it's labor right appoint you. Some of you go on like you're not labor right. You're very labor right. Minister, I entreat you. If there be any room within your thinking to find that your answers last week and your statement today, taken together or singly, could possibly or probably have misled the Senate or misled the public, I entreat you to stand up, face it, say it, and ask for forgiveness because you did not mean it. But at least, at the very least, understand what you did and let your conscience be your guide.
That's difficult though.
Mr. President, I just want to state unequivocally for the record and to the people of Jamaica, as a result of the entreaty just made, that not only did I not mislead this Senate or state any falsehood, not only did I not breach any standing order, or make any inaccurate statement, on behalf of the professionals of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, I absolutely have to bring them into this because you raised it. You raised it. Who have guided me, and who advise, and who are fundamental to the very processes to which Senator Knight has referred. I reject his statements on their behalf. I reject them. I reject each and every one. Each and every one. I reject them on behalf of every professional. Without whom, Mr. President, without whose support, the undeniable successes of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs over the last 3 years could not have occurred without their support. On their behalf, I reject every allegation he has made of inefficiency and of incompetence and of every other negative adjective ascribed. I reject every one on their behalf, Mr. President.
Point of order, Mr. President. A point of order. A point of order. You called on Pete because you wanted mercy.
Senator Knight.
What's the point of
You have a
order?
point of order.
I want to make it clear
It's a dull point.
that I had at no stage in any question I asked or any comment I made was
Point of clarification.
call it that.
What you are saying is that you never implicated the Ministry.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is made up of the finest officers in the government service. What I will say.
Who prepared the statement? Him said the ministry prepared the statement.
I will say,
not we.
What I will say, because they would never say it and would never think it. But what
out of the sky? Nonsense. Not there. You know that.
What I will say is that the officers of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs deserve a better minister than they have.
That's the solution.
Mr. President.
We have a great Minister of Foreign Affairs. And we have a great Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Best in my lifetime, for sure.
Mr. Brown, you have a question or questions. Please proceed.
Best in my life.
Mr. President, arising from the statement this morning of the Minister, I have some questions which I'd like to raise. First, I want to ask whether there were any consular contact, that is, the fine men and women of her ministry, whether there were any contact by the consular service with the men prior to them being put on trial.
Minister, just respond so we can move along quickly, please.
I am not aware of any. Thank you.
Senator Brown?
So my understanding is that the answer is there was no contact. Oh, no. So let me ask it again.
She was not aware.
Let me ask it again. Am I to understand, Minister, that your lack of awareness, having done your investigation, would be indicative that there was no consular contact with the men before they faced the United States court?
There is no record of same.
Good, thank you. No record of consular contact. I'd also like to ask, Mr. President of the Minister, how many consular offices had contact, or officers had contact with any of those 5 men prior to the deportation of them?
I would have to verify that, Mr. President. I am aware of one, but I would have to verify if there were further.
So I'm understanding from the minister's answer that there might have been one prior contact before the deportation, so that they would be in prison for 10 months, and she need to verify if there was one contact. Well, could I hear the occasion on which this one contact took place?
This was, Mr. President, the reference that I made last week, which is the on deportation. There is an interview that takes place, on request for the emergency travel certificate, which is issued to permit the return of the citizen. There's an interview which takes place to ascertain nationality, and that is the occasion to which I refer.
Mr. President, could I ask where did that interview take place? Was it while the men are in jail, in prison, or was it at the consular office of the ministry, or at the airport, or wherever it was? I want to know that.
I would have to verify the exact location, Mr. President. But it is, so far as I understand, it was not at the consulate itself.
Sorry, you're saying? I didn't hear that. I was distracted. Can I just clarify the answer? Was the interview at the consulate, you're saying? Not there. Are you aware of the circumstances under which the interview took place? And that's one. And 2, can you tell the Senate whether any of your consular officer asked the men about their treatment while in detention on the U.S. Coast Guard vessels?
Mr. President, I can seek the details of the conversation, which might assist. But as I pointed out earlier today, one of the difficulties in making the connection, the correlation between the two matters, was that when the request was made for the deportation, it was not brought to the attention of the consulate that any of the men had been detained in the circumstances which have subsequently been spoken to.
Sorry, so to the best of your knowledge, Minister. To the best of your knowledge, Minister. Thank you. To the best of your knowledge, Minister. Mr. President, I'm aware, and the Minister can confirm from our staff, I'm aware, that when, as in the case of the Qatari rapist, the rapist in Qatar, consular service went to visit that person in prison. I want to get from the minister, is she aware? Sir, you listening to me or you're quarreling with KD? Good. And I repeat, in the case, and you are aware, and the President was aware, and Senator Gale was aware of much discussion in the Senate about the person convicted of rape in Qatar, your ministry should be aware that numerous consular contact took place where people traveled from Dubai to Qatar to check. Can you tell us whether or not your consular officers in Miami visit any of those men while they're in prison?
Senator Brown, the minister said that she's aware of one visit.
And I'm asking if that includes a visit to the men while they're in prison. I'm entitled to know that because the country wants to know the money we're paying for these people in Miami and otherwise, whether they're defending our people. So while the men were in prison, did our consular service went to visit them?
Mr. President?
This is not an attack on the civil service.
Allow the minister to answer, please. Go ahead, please, Minister.
Mr. President, it is part of the business of the ministry to make consular visits to prisons. Because of the volume of Jamaicans, regretfully, that are in prison, whether in Florida or elsewhere overseas, it is impossible for us to always see everyone. Where there are requests for consular assistance, we unfailingly visit and inquire and follow up. To the best of my knowledge, the Consulate General was not aware of these men's imprisonment until the request was made for their emergency certificate.
Thank you.
The consular engagement was the point to which I referred earlier.
Mr. President, I'm in regard for the fact that the minister played a role in signing the waiver. Can she tell us what, and so that all these Jamaicans who are in prison, very few of them are there as a result of a waiver signed by the government of Jamaica. So I'm trying to find out whether having signed over the waiver for these 5 Jamaican fishermen, did the minister inform the consulate that these men were picked up at sea, they are likely to be facing American court, and therefore ensuring that we give them the protection which the shipwright agreement require that they receive. You can't lump them in Jamaica and find for fighting, thieving, shooting, drugs. These are special set that you, Mr. President, and I passed the law allowing for that.
I never passed it.
You man, you were part of it. Here, the Parliament passed it.
Senator,
and you're part of the Parliament.
Senator,
but the neophyte seems to be taking our attention.
Minister, answer that for me, please.
Mr.
You heard the question?
No, I'm not 100% clear on the question, but I want to make quite clear that I did not sign any waiver. I did not sign any waiver of anything. And I want to correct him for the record, as he has repeated on more than one occasion, just a while ago, that I signed. I didn't sign anything. So he needs, but now I would wish his clarification of the question.
Mr. President, it's clear to me that the Attorney General was consulted. Minister Chang, the Minister of National Security, whoever it was at the time, communicate to the American government through the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who happened to be this Minister of Foreign Affairs, and therefore the question is, the waiver process that she was involved in, did she communicate?
Scarefree. I'm sorry, Senator Scarefree, would you please stop interrupting Senator Brown? No, but Senator Brown is hitting you and telling you to leave him alone.
No, Mr. President, so my name is only Miguel Paul. Your colleague, yes, Cavan. Please, with due respect, balance the argument.
No, well, I wasn't looking over there.
I know my name is easy to call.
I saw Senator Brown touching you and telling you to just leave him so he can complete.
I am supporting my colleague.
Mr. President, let me ask a question because I was interrupted in person. Given the fact that the Attorney General advised the National Security Minister, who then advised this Minister of Foreign Affairs to write to the Americans communicating our waiver of the rights of these Jamaicans to be tried in Jamaica, did this Minister communicate with our fine professional staff to indicate to them that here are 5 Jamaicans who are going to be facing trial in the United States? Could you have a look in and do the things that the consular officers are paid to do? I was trying to find that out. May I get an answer to that?
So, Mr. President, it would probably be helpful for me to explain a little more about the circumstances regarding the provision of consular assistance. It's a right under the Vienna Convention, and it is a right which is exercisable by the person who holds that right, that is the citizen who is overseas. It is not a right that can be exercised without their request. The issue is, it is Article 36, where someone is detained in prison or under Article 36C, sir, look it up yourself, that it must be that where a person is in those circumstances, the express request for consular assistance. Now, Mr. President, I want to make it clear that when the Ministry of National Security advised the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to communicate that waiver would be authorized. Waiver of prosecution, not waiver of rights. Not waiver of rights, waiver of jurisdiction to prosecute. Waiver of jurisdiction to prosecute. I'd said it earlier. I said not foolishness. Why, Mr. President, can I not be heard in silence?
Come on.
Why can I? Is there a reason I cannot be heard in silence, Mr. President? I am addressing you, Mr. President.
I completely disagree.
Senate Minister, perhaps they don't wish to hear your answer. You ever thought of that? In which case we can move on.
I asked the question, I want to hear the answer.
You ask the question and then you're making up a rumbling over there so the minister cannot answer.
Please, I have made up no anything. I have remained calm, and I think you should.
You have remained calm.
Mr.
You
President.
have remained calm.
But Mr. President, I think it is time for us to really try and just maintain some decorum. This is the Honourable Senate, of which we are all here.
Thank you,
can't
Senator.
be attacking the President so often.
Thank you. Minister, just ask the question. Answer the question. Just answer the question.
Mr. President, it's important to note that even where persons are detained by a third country and are advised of their right to consular assistance, that even then sometimes they do not avail themselves of that right. And I'm not saying that that happened in this circumstance, but it has happened. So I need no. Well.
Consular officer sent me for that. President.
I don't think the minister has finished. I didn't stop you,
No,
okay.
she was. President, could the minister indicate whether or not the shipwright agreement and the waiver of jurisdiction allows for conditions to be followed, to be observed, which include the protection of the rights of the fishermen?
Mr. President, I indicated in my public statement, and this has been stated, perhaps I should restate, however. Yes, Mr. President, that when the waiver was granted, it was granted on conditions. And those conditions related to the health and well-being of the men, that they would be provided with legal assistance, that they're entitled to legal representation in any case that follows, and also that they're entitled to be notified of their right to consular assistance. And, Mr. President, I will go further to say that the Jamaican government was assured that these conditions would be met.
President, can the minister indicate to us what steps the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade took to ensure that those conditions in the waiver document were observed? Or is it that we were relying totally on the United States government while abandoning, as a Ministry of Government of Jamaica, the fishermen who were in need? Sell out, you prefer me use? So I'm waiting for an answer to that, and I have another question.
Point of order, Mr. President. A point of order. Mr. President, it cannot be that in this Senate we continue to allow that kind of inflammatory language to stand on the record. Because what will happen is years from now, people will come back and listen and read the Hansard and believe it. It is nonsense. There is nothing that could establish the kind of nonsensical statements that continue to be uttered. He must be stopped.
No, Mr. President. Well, let me break it down. Can I ask the minister whether or not, having regard for the conditionalities in the waiver document, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs took any steps to ensure that they were observed? I can't see how that can be improper.
That's a different question than the one that you're asking.
Well, maybe I've clarified, I've rephrased.
Mr. President, the ministry followed all the protocols. That is what I will say.
Protocol. May I ask, who followed up? Who followed up from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make sure those were observed? I don't know what is this protocol.
All protocols were followed.
Could I ask then, Mr. President, as a follow-up, what are the protocols? After your 120 break, what are the protocols?
Members, I bring to your attention that it is 1:20. We are still on statement by ministers. I'm going to ask that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:20 to complete the business.
Mr. President, might I ask, the time being 1:21, might I ask that the Senate be allowed to sit, the standing orders be suspended to allow the Senate to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day.
The question is that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the order to the business of the day. Those in favor? Against?
Mr. President, with that out of the way, could I ask what are the protocols involved? I am asking what are the... Mr. President, what are the protocols involved when waiver has been given under the shipwright agreement? Because the minister said they have followed all protocol, but we only know about, she's concerned maybe one visit. So I want to know what are the protocols involved. And as a member of the Senate, I'm entitled to know. And I hope the minister will answer that question.
Mr. President, I think we're now treading on dangerous ground. Mr. President, If it is that senators have further questions on the matter of Shiprider, implementation of the maritime drug trafficking suppression, yes, Mr. President, I'm going to ask, because of the sensitivity of matters related to bilateral treaties such as the Shiprider Agreement, even if they are enacted by legislation, they are by their nature sensitive. And I'm going to ask, therefore, that if there are further questions, that they be submitted in writing, that I get guidance from the Attorney General on their responses, and that they can be put back. I think we are now going down a path which is ill-advised and unadvisable for this Senate. It is not the place. It is not the place.
Mr. President, it will appear to me that the government is trying to hide behind protocols. But let me ask another question. Let me move on to another question. That is not Shiprider. You like why not shouting, President? We can get produced. President, I'd like to ask the minister, because she spoke about the discussion of last week and the statement she made. If when I asked her last week, when I asked the minister last week, and I said, given that the event started in 2017, can the minister indicate to the Senate when was the first time that this information came to the attention of the government of Jamaica? Now we are aware, Mr. President, that this information came to the government's attention from 2017. And whereas this Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade played a part in communicating the waiver to the United States, is she prepared to accept today that in pointing us to 2018, that she misled the Senate?
Mr. President, I have never misled the Senate.
Thank you. Senator Brown, come on.
Her answer is no. Having said no, is she prepared to reconsider her response last week, given her integral role in 2017, and at least apologize to those of us in the Senate and in the country who felt, if you listen, you will hear. Mr. President, you hear the little fellow making all of those noise? I'm not finished. I'm not finished, sir.
I know you're not finished. I have been more than lenient with the questions that I have permitted. You are repeating questions that were asked, some of them by Senator Knight and some of them by yourself.
No, not true.
So I'm going to ask you to conclude questioning.
That's what I'm trying to do, you know.
Okay.
But you interrupted me. It's your right to do, but you interrupted me. President, having regard for what the ACLU have said about the role of the Minister and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, having regard for all that has come out, is the Minister prepared to acknowledge that her statement was at least ambiguous last week?
Minister, answer that question, please.
No, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Brown. Announcements.
I have a right to ask questions, Mr. President.
That's right.
I have a right to ask. Yes.
Senator Crawford, go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. I have a few questions I'd like to ask based on the statement that was made. The first question I have, Mr. President, to the Minister is if she signed the waiver that is in question for these 4 fishermen less than 2 years ago.
Mr. President, as stated earlier, I signed nothing.
Mr. President, then I ask, did she receive a letter, a waiver letter, less than 2 years ago? Mr. President.
No, but that was all dealt with, you know.
No, Mr. President. It was highlighted, Mr. President, it was highlighted that the minister received a letter. I am adding to that question if she received that letter less than 2 years ago.
Mr. President, the letter from the Ministry of National Security in relation to the waiver of jurisdiction was sent in 2017. Yes.
Mr. President, I think the minister has agreed that she received the letter less than 2 years ago. Okay, in 2017, approximately 2 years ago. Now, the second thing, Mr. President, if the minister is of the opinion that the signing of such a letter is mandatory or by choice of the minister or whoever is the signatory, is the act, under the act, is it mandatory to sign once the letter is received, or if there's a choice to sign once the letter is received? Whoever is the waiver letter, once the waiver is requested, is it mandatory to be given or no?
No, Mr. President, it is not.
Mr. President, I asked that question because in the statement the minister found it necessary to acknowledge that all members of the opposition voted against the clause that allowed for such a waiver. That's right. Therefore, if it is not, and yes, but in this case, the government at this time would have had an option to offer the waiver or not. In this case, yes. In this case, that was done by choice. Madam Minister, you indicated in your initial statement and repeated today that you are aware of some facts based on a social media video. That those facts would have included that there were 4 fishermen, that those facts would have included that they were arrested, that those facts would have included that they were treated badly. You ever continue to say that you couldn't connect those facts that you saw on the social media with the case that had occurred? Would you suggest that there are many such cases in the period that we're discussing in the last 2 years? Are there many such cases of waivers being granted in general and for fishermen in particular?
Mr. President, I'll clarify that I said I was aware of certain allegations and yes, certain facts in respect of the number of fishermen. I would not say that there have been many cases, no.
So would you argue that being that you were aware of at least some facts and that there were not many cases, the inability to connect is somewhat questionable?
No, Mr. President, and those circumstances have been laid out in several different ways and from several different perspectives today alone.
Thank you. Would you argue, Mr. President, I'd like to ask the minister if there is a basis that reports are sent on persons that are deported, whether they're deported on commercial flights or whether they're deported on charter flights. Is information sent to your ministry or any other ministry about persons being deported? I'm asking that based on the simple fact that in your statement today, you made special reference that they came on a charter. Can they come on a charter without information being sent that they're being deported? And would that information have been sent to you?
The information would not have been sent to me, but there would be some knowledge between both the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and National Security, the latter being the one that's ultimately responsible for the deportation.
Just being clear, when we say you in your position as Minister of of Foreign Affairs.
No, they're not sent to me.
And so, therefore, the ministry is included in the conversation. But I get what you're saying. So, would you argue then that the fact that they came on a commercial flight is of no substance to the conversation we're having? You suggested that they came on a commercial flight, and by extension, seemingly you were unaware that they were returned.
Mr. President, that was one of the matters which was raised. I also raised the fact that the requests for emergency travel certificates were made at different times. They were made as a group. They were not made as a group, and they made no reference to the circumstances that originated their detention. This was why there was no connection made.
Yes, I heard that.
All right. You also made reference to conversations with members of the consulate who you suggested, not your words, but in my opinion, I concluded that they were flippant in being asked were there complaints. They said, we're Jamaicans, Jamaicans complain. You said that, Minister. You said that verbatim. You said that you had a conversation. Mr. President? Mr. President?
Mr. Crawford, just ask a question, please.
Yes, but I'm making it known. Right? The minister is rejecting the truth that she stated a conversation with members of the consulate. The response could be concluded to be flippant because the individual suggested, was asked, did they complain? And they said the Jamaicans complained.
All right, so ask the question and let's move on, please.
Would the minister argue that such a mindset is not acceptable for that flippant outlook as it relates to complaints to the consulate?
Mr. President, I do not believe that the officer in question was being flippant. The conversation did not happen exactly as was set out. What I was saying was that at one of the things that was said.
Senator Crawford, sit properly enough, please.
One of the things that was said when being questioned as to whether there was any, there had ever been or it was usual for this person to receive complaints at that point of engagement, in other engagements with other persons who are returned to Jamaica, whether it was usual or it had occurred or it would occurs that he gets complaints about treatment. And he said it in a way which sort of recognized that it happens often. And I don't think the intention was to be flippant. It was to reflect the regularity with which it occurs. Thank you.
Would you say that the regularity of the complaint is synonymous with the regularity of the offense, of the fact that it happens regularly? By extension, they complain regularly. Do you have any information to suggest that?
No, Mr. President, no, I don't have any information to answer that question.
Mr. President, in her statement, the minister suggested great care for the treatment of Jamaicans internationally. I want to ask if there's a report sent to the minister or the ministry, whether monthly or quarterly or weekly, about such abuses or about such complaints.
Mr. President, I'm happy to provide on another occasion a more detailed response on the processes which are offered, the consular assistance and the type of reporting which exists within the ministry.
Mr. President, the answer has nothing to do with the question. I said if there's a report sent to the ministry or the minister, and if there is a periodic basis upon which such report is sent, that have nothing to do with the operations and the whatever. All I'm saying is, if we are so committed and caring, we would at least want the information. Is that information sent to the ministry and the minister?
There is no such report made to the minister. I would have to make inquiries as to the regularity of any reporting within the ministry.
Final question, Mr. President. Would the minister argue that there has been reduced zeal in the treatment of this specific case as versus another case mentioned by Senator Brown, when in opposition the government was very committed to an individual arrested in Qatar at the time.
There is no reduced zeal, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if I may just ask two quick questions of the Minister. Minister, you mentioned that as part of the agreement or the waiver, there are certain conditions that both states would have agreed on, one of which was the protection of the human rights of the Jamaicans. And I wondered, Minister, whether you can state what systems were put in place by the ministry to ensure that the human rights of these detainees were protected. These 5 Jamaicans were protected.
The condition, to be specific, did not reference human rights. It referenced the wellness, the health and wellness of them. Yes, because then you keep saying that I said things when I didn't say them, so I must correct them. I did not. I said, and I
Just
have
on a
said
point
before,
of order, Mr. President, on a point of order. Last week the minister said if what happened would constitute an abuse of the human rights of the men.
Senator Brown, you had your chance to make your point and ask the question. Senator, it is not a point of order.
No,
Senator Binns, continue, please.
You haven't heard it as yet.
Continue, please, Senator
You haven't heard
Binns.
it.
Senator Binns, continue.
Tell us the abuse of human rights.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, if we want to be exact, I have no challenge. I do believe that is unparliamentary, Minister. Disgusting, to use the word disgusting to describe you.
But I am disgusting to
but,
them too. They're right. I disgust those who sell out Jamaican people. I'm disgusted about them, and yes. So
Senator Brown.
Mr. President, if I may just ask the Minister a question. You indicated that part of the agreement, one of the conditions was to ensure the health and wellness of the Jamaicans. My question, therefore, is what systems, if any, were put in place to ensure the health and wellness of these Jamaicans while incarcerated for 10 months in the United States?
Mr. President, this matter is related to the provision of consular assistance, which I spoke to earlier, where consular assistance has not been requested because it is not unusual for it not to be requested, and it must be requested if a person is in detention. Again, I cannot say the reason why it was not requested, but it was not, and that would be the trigger for such care and assistance. Thank you.
Minister? Minister, would you say that there were regular visits to the prison where these Jamaicans were held to ensure their health and wellness?
Senator Fraser-Binns, can you repeat the question?
Mr. President, I shall repeat, but I'm going to ask that you ask the minister to at least, pretend, even if she has no interest. The question I'm asking, Minister, is whether you can say how many visits were made by your office or officers to ensure the health and wellness. To ensure the health and, well, some of us have memory issues, right? And we will accept that we forget.
Senator Fraser-Binns, don't be distracted.
So, Mr. President, I'm asking the minister if she can state how many visits were made by her officers to the prison of these Jamaicans to ensure their health and wellness, even without a request from the consular office.
Mr. President, making consular visits to prisons and places of detention is part of the work of the ministry. I could never answer a question like that at large. I can say that what I've said at several times today in response to the questions, that in this particular case, the sole consular engagement between the particular persons here, named here, was at the point of the request for the emergency travel certificate for their deportation.
So, Mr. President, through you, so if I can just understand what the minister is saying. So we signed a waiver. Jamaica, the government of Jamaica signed a waiver. And part of the condition of the waiver is to preserve the health and wellness of the Jamaicans. But to her knowledge, as of today, there is no record, or she can't speak with any authority that any steps were taken by the Jamaican government to ensure the health and wellness of these Jamaicans. That is the conclusion that I'm coming to based on what the minister is saying.
Mr. President, we requested, rather it was a condition of the waiver of jurisdiction that they assure the health and well-being of the men, and we were assured that this was done, that they had been examined and that this was done, Mr. President. So let me place that on the record.
May I just seek further clarification so we do not leave here today with any doubt? Could you state who made this assurance and in what manner was the assurance given?
Assurance was given in writing by a representative of the United States Embassy.
And perhaps you could share with us when this assurance was given? When?
I don't have the exact date, but it was in 2017.
And to my knowledge, they were released in 2018. So an assurance was given prior to their release, but there isn't anything.
Before we contact the government about them was when the U.S. said it was done with them.
Let me come closer to home, perhaps to something that is within your immediate knowledge, Minister. Mr. President, through you, perhaps something that is within the Minister's immediate knowledge. I wish to find out how many of the 5 fishermen you have met with since this incident has gone public.
Mr. President, as I indicated earlier, we are reaching out to the men. I have not yet met with them.
So is it then, Minister, can I then conclude that over the past week, since this matter has come to the public attention, you nor your office have met with any of these 5 fishermen? The answer is yes? Oh, pardon.
Yes.
And Minister, I am I'm so very happy that you mentioned that it is not a game, because Minister, you know,
Senator Fraser-Binns, continue, please.
But Mr. President, I would love to continue, but I cannot compete with the minister. In fact, I think I'm imposing on her time, so I'm giving an opportunity to finish, and then I will speak.
Ask a question.
When she's ready, Mr. President.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you know, the minister mentioned it is a game. Right? No, the minister mentioned that we think it's a game. I'm correcting myself.
Senator,
she mentioned that.
Senator, with the greatest of respect,
she mentioned
the minister
that
said this is not a game.
Right. And I'm correcting myself, Minister, because that is in fact what she said. And Mr. President, let me state categorically that on this side, this cannot be a game. When you have a system of the government of Jamaica giving up the constitutional rights of Jamaicans
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
And then
Mr. Speaker, you cannot tell me when to talk. Shut up. You cannot tell me when to talk. On a point of order. On a point of order.
Why isn't there a fight start?
None over there can tell me when to talk.
Senator Morgan.
None. on a point of order.
Am I being threatened by the neophyte?
Senator Brown, would you please sit? Senator Morgan, what is the point of order?
Mr. President, I think the questioner is misleading the House. There's no evidence anywhere where the government has given up the constitutional rights of the people of Jamaica in this matter. No evidence. There's nothing that exists in the evidence that has been presented here where it can be concluded that the government of Jamaica has given up the constitutional rights of the people of Jamaica and these fishermen in particular. I ask that you ask her to withdraw this statement. I ask you to rule for her to withdraw that statement. You cannot tell me when to talk. You cannot tell me when to talk. Withdraw it.
Senator Fraser Binns.
In Montego Bay, the people not take from Montego Bay and show them where down St. Elizabeth.
Mr. President.
Senator Morris.
Mr. President.
We are going to eat some lunch.
Mr. President, I rise. Mr. President, in the member's move just a while ago, he referred to individuals on this side of the chamber as UNO. And I take offense to the term, Mr. President, because it is unparliamentary, and you should ask the member. You should ask the member to withdraw that comment, because a few weeks ago, when he spoke in the Parliament, you plead for him on the basis of innocence and him just being a member of the Parliament in a few weeks. And so, Mr. President, I believe that we should school him properly, and you should ensure that he withdraws that reference to his parliamentary colleagues.
I hear you, Senator Morris, and you know, I would very much appreciate if you could assist me, now that you're trying to assist me with the word UNO. I would appreciate if you could assist me in the future when persons are pointing and referring to people as she and other disrespectful ways of referring to members of the Senate. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I appreciate your intervention. Senator Morgan, I ask you not to refer to other members of the Senate as UNO. And I would also ask Senator Morris if you would be kind enough to assist me when other persons are pointing at ministers and referring to them as she. So let us try and lift the debate.
I agree with you, Mr. President, and I...
President.
Senator Morris, you're a man of vision, and you must can draw your conclusion based on the tone in which it is referred. Senator Nye.
President. I have heard this thing about use of the personal pronoun. There's nothing in the standing orders preventing that. And there is nothing at all that would cause anyone schooled in etiquette to be questioning it. What happens is that ministers, it's really in relation to ministers, they don't like to be referred to as he. One must continuously, minister, minister, minister.
What Senator Knight? I've never heard this minister say it. I've never heard this minister say that.
I've never said that she said
and you know, I would have allowed it, but it's
saying
really,
that
when kids,
if you don't know,
when kids are here, it's kind of a bit harsh, and it kind of diminishes the debate. So what Senator Morris is saying is stop the use of the word uno as opposed to you all or you people or you senators.
No,
but
no,
anyway, look
no,
here now. Watch here. Hear what Senator Knight. Listen to what my position is. You want to know what my
just hear me.
No, Mac, I just finish. Hear what my position is.
Yeah.
If uno or the honourable members of this Senate appointed here by the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition choose to come here and behave in the most egregious and outrageous way, I mean, I can only sit here. The people of Jamaica look on every Friday. Many of them, you would be surprised to know the amount of people from all walks of life that sit here and watch this debate. And they come and comment. First of all, I get a question every time I go to the supermarket. And yes, Don Webby, I go to the supermarket, although not your particular brand. And people come up and say, but my God, the behavior in the Senate is so disrespectful and outrageous, and you know, accosting one another, and them turn on me because I cannot control it. All of you are adults. Each of you exemplify your particular position in the country. Trade unionists, teachers, attorneys, all psychiatrists, all manners of people come here. So if you all you don't want the word uno, but if uno choose to come here on a Friday and diminish the Senate, diminish yourself, diminish your family, and diminish the process, go ahead. Hear this again. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And don't flash your hand and a cuss and a throw a word. Stop it, man. And let us try and
President.
Try and lift the debate a little bit, no? People are what? You are diminishing the process by the shouting and the screeching. You are going to get blood pressure. Look at you now.
Mr. President,
you're going to catch pressure.
Mr. President, I apologize.
I'm going to tell you something. No, Senator Brown, don't interrupt me. I sat here the other day and saw your family come here, and you were behaving so well.
I'm going to bring them next week.
You're trying to catch our strokes in front of the whole nation.
Mr. President, I apologize. I was only here in your behavior
I don't want you to apologize to me. I want you to try and maintain the decorum of the Senate. But I just said a while ago, I don't care. I am required by my position to sit here and listen and to observe and to try and maintain some order. I am not allowing any of you to put up my blood pressure.
President.
Senator Knight, you think it's necessary to say anything after that presentation that I made? Because Senator Fraser means don't finish yet, you know.
I don't think. Well, the answer is yes, it is necessary. And I will tell you why. I too go to the supermarket and other public places. And there are some persons who said to me, what happened?
Sorry, it's Senator Horton can't take it anymore.
You know, there you go, hissing your teeth. I've spoken to you about that already. You know. Persons said to me, how come the president walked out of the chamber the way he did?
And I said,
may I finish? And I said to the person, he's not normally like that. So, you know, take it easy on him.
No, but Senator Knight, the truth about the matter is that when I walked out of the Senate last Friday, I intended to go to my yard. Is you and I had a debate in my office that caused me to come back here because I had reached the end of my tether.
Right. So, you know, I'm concerned about these things. The next thing is, when a senator says you all, unless it be used in a way in which it can be said to be abusive, there is nothing wrong with that communication. When a senator says uno.
Mr. President, on a point of order.
No.
Mr. President, on a point of order.
No, it's okay. It's all right.
Mr. President, on a point
Senator
of
Morgan.
order.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Mr. President, on a point of order.
I'm going to ask you just to hold a point of order for a minute for me, please. Senator.
When a senator says uno, the reason that exception can be taken to it is provided for under standing orders. Because we are going through a process now, and I think we should amend it. But the standing orders provide that communication in the Senate must be in English.
Yes, thank you.
In English.
Thank you, Senator.
And it raises the point as to whether or not we should allow ourselves some flexibility by amending the standing orders, because we are not here just speaking amongst ourselves and to each other. We are speaking also to the public.
Thank you, Senator.
And so, on that issue, whilst what exists must not be breached, I do believe that we should have some regard to introducing the possible use
Truth
of
about the matter is
vernacular.
that we have already introduced quite a bit of dialect. Senator.
We haven't.
Yes, we have every Friday. Senator Fraser Binns, continue.
In breach of the standing orders.
I agree with you, but I allow it.
I'm trying to say that there must be order, and here it is. You are willing to facilitate a breach. That's
I'm going to ask you to listen.
it.
I'm going to ask you just to sit there and listen and hear how much breach of
There is
failure to use standard English come
but
up.
Mr.
you
President.
preside, you must now take charge of that. I'm going to have another talk with you.
All right, Senator Morgan, please. Senator Fraser Binns, continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm just wrapping up. But before I say my final bit, let me just say to Senator Morgan that silence is golden. Minister, in response to your comment about it is not a game, let me just assure you that on this side it is not a game. In fact, it's because of the seriousness of the matter why we have spent so much time, why we have undertaken the kind of research that we have undertaken. And we feel aggrieved that there is a situation here that we believe that the government really has been caught in the eighth ball. The government has just not done enough to protect the interests and the well-being of Jamaicans. And we also believe, Minister, that the manner in which it has been treated over the last 7 days is less than desirable. Here the Minister comes to the House and makes a statement.
Senator Fraser Binns, a question you're supposed to ask me.
I'm coming to that, sir. It's a long run up. I'm like Michael Holden. Remember Michael Holden? I'm like Michael Holden. So the Minister makes a statement. And the Minister, for whatever the reason, comes today and sought to clarify that certain things that were said last week could have been misunderstood or misinterpreted. I believe that in showing the kind of regard to the issue, that the right and the noble thing to do would have been to say there were errors, there were misstatements, there were incomplete statements, and we are sorry. And Minister, I believe that there still is an opportunity for you to correct that wrong, because to err is human, and I don't believe that it speaks to competence or the lack thereof, but perhaps what it does is shows that in fact the statement was ill-prepared, the statement was not timed properly, and as such the errors made could have been presented. And Minister, the question therefore, Mr. President, is whether the Minister would agree with what I said. Thank you, sir.
No.
Mr. President, I don't
I'm
agree.
telling you now to say no.
I expected that response from you, Mr. President.
So follow from Senator Fraser's
I was
question.
trying to show him some while ago.
Minister, you said you have not met, you personally as a minister, have not met with the fishermen in question. No. For a week when... disturb.
Yes, I had said earlier, Mr. President, that we are reaching out to them and the intention is to meet with them, yes.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Ministry paper number 28 of 2019 entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone Social Intervention. Ministry paper number 29 of 2019 entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zone Social Intervention. Ministry papers number 30 to 33 of 2019 entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues, dated March 11, 18, and 25, and April 8. Annual reports of the Jamaica Fire Brigade for the years 2014, 2015, and 2015, 2016. The provisional collection of tax, asset tax, specified body confirmation and extension orders, 2019 resolution. And the Jamaica Gazette Supplement Proclamation Rules and Regulations, legal notice number 48A, dated Thursday, March 28, 2019, under the provisional collection of tax, asset tax, specified body order 2019.
Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives. Petitions. I'm sorry. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honourable Senate, I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 18th day of June 2019, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act to provide for an increase in the personal income tax threshold, to provide for an initial allowance and on capital expenditure in respect of the purchase of renovation of industrial buildings, to give permanent effect to matters previously effected provisionally, and for connected matters, was passed in the House of Representatives with 3 amendments. Signed, Colonel P. Charles C.D. J.P. MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
A bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment Act 2019, read the first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally. Questions and answers to questions.
President, once again I rise to ask about the question standing in my name. on the question order paper.
Senator Brown.
Call me anything you want. I'm cool.
No, I don't know. Oh, I was just going to say I'd spoken to the minister about them this morning, but he's here. He can answer for himself. I was inquiring about the questions that we had discussed this morning.
I'm awaiting some information to complete the responses, and so ask humbly for indulgence in that regard.
Senator Brown, he and I discussed it because I asked, and there's a gap in it, and in short order, because I was concerned about the length of time, so he explained it to me.
You have a sense of what the short order is, given the gap and what the gap is? Because that
Minister, answer now, please. What sort of time frame are you looking at?
As soon as possible, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the standing order requires that the answer must be given within 21 days. I know people say no about civil servants and we attack civil servants, but it is most inefficient and a breach of the standing order if the 21 days is to be treated as soon as possible. I need some timelines. I ask, having regard for what you have said. And my wife sent a message with saying, don't get heart attack. Be like Sophia and Katie in response to it. She watching it on TV and she said, but you don't want to see her message. She said that you don't want to see it. President.
Okay, Mr. Senator, look, we're kind of running a bit on time. I had a discussion with him because I was concerned about it, and I will follow it up.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Mr. President, it is intended today to continue the debate on or rather to close the debate on the bill entitled the Trust Act 2018. And while the agenda did set out that we would treat with the Bauxite and Alumina Encouragement Act, the act to amend that act, it is proposed that we simply take the Trust Act today.
Okay. I need to just say that when the Trust Act was taken last week, I was not here. I know that I think it was Senator Hill that was sitting in the chair. So if you could just tell me where you had reached in the debate.
We were just at closure of the debate. The opposition had completed their interventions, their contributions to the debate, and the matter was left for me to close. But we had suspended the debate in order to allow for technical advice to be taken on suggestions for amendments which were made, Mr. President.
Okay, so would you close the debate and ask that it goes? You're asking that you're going to close the debate now, and then we go to committee. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in closing the debate, because there was, I think, the Senate would benefit from just a reorientation in terms of the intent behind this bill. The bill, Mr. President, of course, is intended to codify the common law in relation to trusts, to repeal the Trustee Act and amend sections 2, 7, and 21 of the Trustees, Attorneys, and Executors Accounts and General Act 1973, and to provide savings and transitional provisions for continuity and to preserve the validity of the enforceability of trusts. The intention behind these acts, Mr. President, is of course to modernize our trust law and to ensure that we are able to pull together a suite of legislation in support of the international financial services sector, which will provide us with an effective opportunity for us to deliver higher level, higher value, higher skilled jobs to our people, and also, of course, to ensure that the framework for trust and the protection that is provided to beneficiaries and to settlers and trustees is more robust. Mr. President, I believe that somewhere in the public debate, as was fostered by interventions made on the opposition side last week, may have distracted us from the intent behind the bill. And this is why I felt it important to remind what it is that we're trying to do. So I think the first point which I should make as I embark on a discussion of or consideration of the proposed amendments which have been put on the floor is first to point out unequivocally that the Act in its current state does nothing to change the constitutional provision by which marriage is defined. It does not permit same-sex marriage, Mr. President. It does not. And it does not amend any other legislation which relates to that matter. Mr. President, Clause 5, 2, A and B are instructive. Clause 5.2, Mr. President, states quite clearly that a trust is invalid and unenforceable in Jamaica to the extent that A, it purports to do anything contrary to the laws of Jamaica, and B, it confers or imposes any right or function or the exercise or discharge of which would be contrary to the laws of Jamaica. Mr. President, it makes it clear, and it fills me with a great sense of distress that the level of public confusion that has been created by the inflammatory statements by Senator Brown, the confusion that has been...
Mr. President, a point of order.
It has been proposed that an amendment be made simply to put the matter beyond debate. But it was not necessary, Mr. President.
Minister, there is a point of order.
Oh, there's a point of order.
The minister is accusing me of making inflammatory statement when all I did was to read the definition of personal relationship which allow for same-sex marriage. The government have now proposed to us to amend that. Why is the minister? You don't want me to call her she. You don't want me to use the pronoun she.
Senator Brown, just address me now, man. What's your point? What is the point?
Why is she accusing me of making an inflammatory statement for simply doing my duty to point out a deficiency in the law under the Prime Minister's name? A law that she's not coming to amend.
Everybody is going to refrain from making inflammatory statements, and we're going to proceed quickly to the committee stage. Thank you. Proceed, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Because it is important to us as an administration to make sure that the public has trust and confidence in legislation which is passed in the Senate, Mr. President. Then we have proposed and we are proposing an amendment to put the matter, a simple amendment, to put the matter beyond debate. But it is really, really, really unfortunate. It is unfortunate that we have to go this route, that people have been riled up in this way. But, Mr. President...
Mr. President, again, I almost feel like I am unable to listen and to hear the leader of government business. I ask, Mr. President, for your intervention so that Senator Knight and others could, even if they want to make sort of what your comments, keep it low so that we can listen and understand.
Thank you. Senator Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are... Thank you, team. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, that aside, Mr. President, that aside, that unfortunate circumstance aside.
Relax, man. Relax, man. I said you are not a legal drafter, but you never do legal interpretation either. But you don't study legal interpretation and statute interpretation. Relax, man.
There's an insistence to attack.
Mr. President, just for your attention, are we going to committee now, sir? President, Minister sat down. Are we going to committee? Is that the motion?
When I am of the view that the minister will be heard in silence, I will invite her to continue.
Then you should tell Pernell to shut up because he's the one interrupting her.
I accept your aggressive tone.
Mr. President, notwithstanding those unfortunate circumstances, there were some good suggestions made last week, and I wanted to just go through the items that had been put forward that we'll accept and those not, and why, to bring the discussion together so that when we proceed to committee, we can move through more effectively, more efficiently, as it is, of course, a bit later in the day that we would normally be undertaking this process. So the first matter is in relation to the proposal to amend the definition of child in order to address the matter that the Maintenance Act provides for persons up to 23, provided they are still where there's a maintenance order that supports the payment of sums for the purposes of education and training. We have therefore proposed an amendment to add a paragraph C to the definition of child, which allows for that specific expansion. It was felt that simply defining it broadly to increase the age would have been an overcorrection, and that the requirement would really be addressed by adding a reference to the relevant section in the Maintenance Act, section 16(3). So that was a very good suggestion, and that has been taken on board. In respect to the matter which I just mentioned, which is the other amendment being put forward under Clause 2, the proposal is to insert just after the word cohabitation, the words in parentheses, to the extent that such relationship is recognized by the laws of Jamaica. And it is expected that this will put the matter beyond debate. Mr. President, it was proposed that Clause 15 should be amended to read the interest of a beneficiary in personal property rather than is, but is the correct word. It's not in. The intention, of course, was to make sure that the interest of a beneficiary is treated as personal property and therefore can be at charge. Mr. President, another issue was raised at Clause 19 regarding the rationale for specifying a minimum number of trustees as 2. Mr. President, the clause is a default position with a view to providing for the continuous administration of a trust where one trustee is unable to act. So no amendment is being proposed to this provision, and it is important to note that it is possible for the settler to appoint one trustee, and the trust won't fail as a result of that, because subclause 2 provides that protection. But it is a default position that should ensure that a best practice is followed. Mr. President, in respect of Clause 22, a query was raised as to why the phrase Court of Competent Jurisdiction was used rather than the Supreme Court of Jamaica. So an amendment will not be accepted, or rather that amendment will not be accepted to this section, because trusts will be enforced under this Act that have to be enforced in other jurisdictions. It's not only local to Jamaica, and therefore the broader reference to a court of competent jurisdiction is the appropriate reference here. It has to be broader. So that one is being kept. It's also consistent with Section 35 of the Conveyancing Act, so it will work together with the existing scheme of legislation. Mr. President, there is a printing error in 24 subclause B, and this is where this is after the words, whereupon the court may ask such order as it thinks fit. These are to go back to the margin as they apply to the entire clause 24. So the words after whereupon the court may make such order should go back to the margin. Mr. President, at subclause 33, a query was also made about the rationale for the requirement that all trustees must agree before any functions can be carried out under a trust. But again, no amendment is being accepted to this provision, Mr. President. Subclauses 3 and 4 preserve the right of trustees to act by majority and for a dissenting trustee to have his dissent recorded in writing. But the very nature of a trust, Mr. President, unless it has been otherwise provided, is such that trustees must act together, save, of course, as has been set out in 3 and 4, in order to deliver the intent of the trust. Mr. President, in respect of Clause 40, a query was made regarding the rationale for the 3-year time limit, and a request was made to limit the number of renewals that were possible. But again, this amendment is not going to be accepted because the intent is to ensure, and the 3-year term was for a limited power of attorney to be granted by a trustee. And that is done to ensure that there is no possibility of a complete delegation by way of power attorney, but the intention is not to ensure that there is an administrative burden where you would have to seek to renew. The intention is to, however, ensure that we will allow for it to be renewed, to continue to be renewed, Mr. President, but for 3-year terms. The 3-year term was, yes, taken from the Guernsey model to limit. And 42, Clause 40 sub 2 will be amended to say that it's renewable for further periods of 3 years. So it's renewable, but there's still a framework. Regarding Clause 44, the question was raised regarding the prohibition of payment of remuneration to a trustee for his services. And here it is, Mr. President. The provision is in fact the common law position, and it's derived from the principle that a trustee is not permitted to profit from his trusteeship. And examining in this issue, of course, it's noted that the Administrator General as public trustee is empowered to charge for her services. Section 12 of the Trustees, Attorneys and Executors Accounts and General Act also provides specifically for a trustee to be paid a commission at the rate permitted under that Act. So accordingly, it is proposed to amend subclause 44(1)(d) to provide for the payment of remuneration to a trustee where the payment is permitted under any other enactment. So this again was another very helpful suggestion that has been taken on board. So, Mr. President, Clause 50 provides that a trustee to whom reimbursement is owed is entitled to a lien over the trust property, save and except in relation to real property. And a rationale was requested as to why real property was being excluded. And again, Mr. President, this is in keeping with the common law position, but the modern law in English courts have in fact, it has been in fact been permitted to grant charging orders, which are liens, against real property in favor of a trustee. So consequently, to accord with the modern approach, it is being proposed that a subclause 6 be included to read, notwithstanding subsection 3b3, a trustee may, on the grounds that is just and equitable, apply to the court for an order for a lien against the real property of a trust. So it is felt that this would create a better balance, still modernize, but ensure that it can only be done by order of the court. So again, very helpful. We think that this has improved the legislation. Mr. President, regarding subclause 54B, a rationale was requested for the provision that a woman over the age of 60 years shall be deemed to be no longer capable of bearing a child. And so it's therefore important to explain that the provision is in the context of trust in favor of a class of persons. And it's intended to make it clear, or make it clear for the trustee to be able to determine a closed class. That is, he must determine the number of potential beneficiaries with a measure of clarity. And this would therefore allow a trustee to close the number of beneficiaries who would fall within that class, given that it is the norm for a woman of 60 to be deemed to be incapable of bearing a child. The circumstances where it has occurred that women above that age have been able to are still considered rare for legislative purposes, and therefore for the purposes of allowing a trustee to be able to determine with reasonable clarity the number of potential beneficiaries, the amendment will not be taken on, the increase in number. Mr. President, it was also noted that Clause 60 contained no penalty in cases where a trustee fails to distribute trust property within a reasonable time following termination of a trust. Mr. President, 64.1 provides that the court has general powers with respect to making orders for the execution, administration, or enforcement of a trust, and this you can note 64.1a1 on this particular point. And Clause 45 sets out the liabilities of a trustee for breach of trust, so that the term breach of trust, as you know, is defined in Clause 2 to mean the breach of any duty imposed on a trustee by this Act or the terms of a trust, or otherwise imposed upon him as a trustee by any rule of law or equity. And it is felt that this is sufficient to give the strength needed, given the nature of trust, given the nature. So action for breach of trust can be brought in respect of either. Mr. President, at the last sitting, it was also posited to amend in Clause 72 to read with a reference to a child not being less than 12 years old. And the concept was to not allow for an interpretation that would say that a beneficiary, a child below 12, could have given consent to an action by the trustee where it is that Jamaica's laws do not recognize that a child below, do not generally recognize a child below 12 as being able to give consent, as a general principle. And what has been determined here is that, and in review of the position, the clause had actually said, and it was based on Section 50 of the Trustee Act, what it had excluded was where a married woman entitled for her separate use and restrained from anticipation had given consent. And it has been thought that, well, that reference is clearly not appropriate. Nowadays, it would be removed. And the modern clause, which was taken from the Guernsey model, was included. But on a review, given the intent, which was really to continue the effect of the Trustee Act, as has been expounded on within the relevant jurisprudence, that what would be appropriate would be to simply lift out the original clause, or rather the original provision in relation to the married woman, and also to remove the reference to the child or person under legal disability, so that the clause now, as is set out in the list provided, would now read that where a trustee commits a breach of trust at the instigation or request of, or with consent in writing of a beneficiary, the court may, if it thinks fit, impound all or any part of the interest of the beneficiary in the trust property by way of indemnity to the trustee or a person claiming through a trustee. So we think that this will allow for the clause to be applied by the court and interpreted in a court in accordance with the circumstances exactly. So that we think is a helpful amendment as well. Regarding clause 89, and this is the last matter on this with which I will treat before we go to committee. A concern was raised regarding persons continuing to be a trustee in circumstances where that person becomes a convict. So the intent here was that, or rather the concern raised was certainly that the trustee becoming a convict would clearly no longer have the level of probity and integrity that one would expect of a person appointed a trustee, and therefore that the person shouldn't be permitted to stand as a trustee. And therefore, however, the purpose of the provision in the first place, its intent, was to ensure that notwithstanding a trustee's conviction, that the trust would be held secure, that by virtue of the trustee's change of status, the trust property itself would not be rendered uncertain. So the trust would still subsist. So the express provision seeks to ensure that no question arises as to the legal status of the trust property, the property itself, and that the trust would therefore continue to exist and be enforceable, notwithstanding the status of the trustee. Now, the issue of the unsuitability of the character of the trustee is being proposed that it may be addressed under clause 64. So that that clause speaks to the power of the court to make orders generally. For one, the execution, administration, or enforcement of a trust, and 64(1)(a)(1) is relevant to this point. And two, perhaps of more interest to the member who had raised this matter, is the removal of a trustee if he is unfit to act or is incapable of acting, which of course deals with the incarceration, etc. And three, of course, where the court removes a trustee, the court may impose any requirements or conditions that it thinks fit, including the requirements and conditions as to the vesting of trust property. And this, of course, is in dealt with in 64(3)(a). So it's noted that orders may be made on application of persons specified in subclause 2, which includes the settlor, the beneficiary, or any other person with leave of the court, so that there is recourse and there is ability of the court to make the relevant corrective action. But in the circumstances, the trust property itself would not be questioned. So, Mr. President, the list of proposed amendments have been circulated to the House to assist us in moving through with dispatch in committee, and it is with on that note that I ask for second reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled, An Act to Make Provision for the Establishment and Administration of Trusts and for Connected Matters, read a second time.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Consequently, I put... No, please. I put the following statement. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Dear. Thank you very much. All right, I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. There is an amendment sheet, and I put the amendment to...
Clause 2, this way you're going?
Pardon?
This clause 2 you're going now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those in favor?
No, Chairman, I have a comment on clause 2. Yeah. Chairman, I've tried to indicate that the clause, the definition excluded bodies include the trade unions and representative bodies of employers in a category with terrorists and criminals. 100 years ago, when the Trade Union Act of Jamaica was passed, it removed the trade union from those categories. Page 3 into 4, excluded body. Yeah. It includes political party and trade unions and representative of employers organization, Chamber of Commerce, in a category at E that promotes unlawful activities, prejudicial activities prejudicial to public order or public safety, in support of terrorism or terrorist activities, whether these activities occur in Jamaica or outside of Jamaica, or for the benefit of organization being a member which is unlawful. And I think, having regard for what happened 100 years ago, I hope I can find support from Senator Gale. Can this excluded bodies be so defined to separate the lawful representative of workers and employers and political party from that group of unlawful? It is the optics that is important. And even though it finds its way in another legislation, which it shouldn't be in, I believe in the name of Bustamante, in the name of Michael Manley, in the name of Hugh Shearer, in the name of Carlisle Dunkley, in the name of Mr. Donaldson from Montego Bay,
okay,
I urge, and in the name of Carlton Alexander from the private sector, I urge that we make a separation.
Some of us were...
Chairman, if I understand Senator Brown, he's complaining that they are in the same clause. Not that the trade union is called a criminal organization. I think it's important that everybody understand that the clause does not attempt to categorize trade unions as a criminal organization. And that is the case. And if you look at it, if you look at it, it says excluded bodies means a political party or body that promotes a political party or candidate of a political party. B, a trade union. No problem with mixing up with trade union, with parties. C, representative body of employers. D, a chamber of commerce or other bodies that promotes the interests of commercial entities. So those are all there, and then it says, or a body that promotes purposes that are unlawful, etc., etc., etc. I think that the reader will clearly understand that there is no attempt to mix up trade union with criminal and outer harder people. So I think that it's just the semantics, the semantics and so on will not create a problem in this case.
Okay, thank you very much. So I put the amendment to clause.
Sorry, Mr. President. I want to ask my trade union colleague if he agrees
You can ask
with
me.
keeping...
You can ask me.
I'm
because,
asking you.
Yeah, and I'm going to answer you. I can understand the sensitivity of it, But the mere fact that between D and E, there's a word with two letters, or suggests that there's a separation. I don't see the trade union being any part of that group, that homogeneous body of unlawful terrorists and that grouping. So I don't share the same sentiments as how you have expressed it.
Yeah, it's not misinterpreting, but if you want to keep the trade union in that group,
I understand.
It's your decision.
I understand what Senator Brown is saying. I understand what has been said. I now put the amendment to clause 2. Those in favor? Against? I put clause 2 as amended. Members, you will notice that the next amendment that is appearing on the sheet appears at clause 40.
No. Sorry, Chairman. I thought you were just dealing with that trade union thing, but at 2, the personal relations, the one that so I'm asking for recommittal so I can be clear on what the amendment is saying here.
1 minute. You want to recommit clause 2?
That's correct, if you're moving away from it.
The question is that clause 2 be recommitted. Those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Clause 2 is recommitted. The question is that the amendment...
No, so, Chairman, my comment.
Eh?
My comment on it, so I want to be clear. Sorry. All right. I thought that's what you're doing.
Yeah, man, he said that.
Him not like you sleeping here. Aye.
Yes, Senator.
Yeah. This is the so-called inflammatory clause that I raised. I just want to be clear that what is being proposed here now is that personal relationship includes every form of relation. Sorry?
Yeah, man.
So what do you think? What is wrong with it?
But you read it a while ago.
Includes every form of relationship by blood, adoption, marriage, or cohabitation. It's been proposed that after the word cohabitation to insert the words to the extent that such relationship is recognized by the laws of Jamaica. That's fine with me because it kills the same-sex argument. However, the other part of the clause, regardless of whether the law of any jurisdiction recognizes the validity, legitimacy, or existence of the relationship, is that being kept in this, and what is the meaning of that in the context of the amendment that we're more minded to agree on?
Yes, Mr. President, the law remains, the rest of the clause remains as is. Remember, the trust, this act provides for trusts that are not only developed here, but are developed elsewhere. The point is that no trust enforced in Jamaica will be enforced against the laws of Jamaica. As I was explaining earlier, and I think I had read from clause 5, 2A and B, which expressly state that no trust, rather a trust is invalid, I'll read it again, and unenforceable in Jamaica to the extent that it purports to do anything contrary to the laws of Jamaica, or it confers or imposes any right or function, the exercise or discharge of which would be contrary to the laws of Jamaica. But trusts may still be enforceable in other jurisdictions. The clause has to be broad enough to not only recognize our jurisdiction and our laws, but it must be broader than that, and that's why the rest of the language has to be retained.
Chairman, I think that the original clause, as was stated, I must say that in reading it, I didn't think it was promoting same-sex marriage or such similar. Yes, it's my opinion, and I'm expressing it. But what it is, Mr. Chairman, is important that the law of trust develops to deal with whatever situation may happen. so that any issue that comes before the court about property, for example, and there is nothing, no contract or anything like that to deal with it, the trust law is usually the law that intervenes and says how that property is to be dealt with and to be divided. That original section, to my mind, simply preserved that already right of trust in the common law. And indeed, all sorts of relationships, whether we like it or not, and I know that people say I'm promoting and I'm not promoting, but all sorts of relationships end up before the court. And the court is asked to make determination how to treat with it. And invariably, they resort to trust law to assist them. I don't think that the change, if it had remained, it would have been detrimental or allowed tomorrow morning marriages of persons not permitted by the Constitution, and the amendment makes it very clear. Speaking as for myself, who is someone who is very astute to such matters.
Thank you. So I put
So I'm understanding the minister to be saying that they are not agreeing to same-sex by the amendment here, but they are prepared to keep that other clause. Let me finish now, sir. Let me finish now. No, I don't want it, but your government is promoting it. I don't want it, but your government is promoting it. Mr. President, why don't you allow me to speak? Why are you allowing Colonel Charles to interrupt me?
Senator Brown.
Yeah?
You are asking for the protection of the
government has clarified it.
Of the
I want it to be
chairman.
about it, and you continue to bring it up. I want it to be unbiased in your relationship.
If you want same-sex, make it clear. Tell us what you want.
The minister has given an explanation.
Is doing what? Yeah, I'm trying to clarify something on it.
The minister has put forward a clarification of the word cohabitation, as I understand it, and continues to say whether the law of any jurisdiction recognizes the validity, legitimacy, or the existence of the relationship. I think that it's clear.
And I'm trying to be clear. I'm trying to be clear, Mr. President, what the government is saying. And they should be happy that I pointed this out, and they too are against the same-sex marriage and the same-sex cohabitation, and that the clause that they're putting in here is going to lead to that. I'm unhappy, however. I'm not seeking applause. You are from Montego Bay. I'm not seeking applause, right? What I want to be clear is that the other part of the legislation, which says, I am proud of what I did then, because I was acquitted.
What exactly did you do
nothing.
then?
So, Mr. President.
What exactly did you do?
Mr. President, why are you allowing them to behave that way and you're not bringing
Mr.
them
President, I'd like some clarity.
That's why
I hear
people
something about bombs. I hear Mr. Brown. I'd like to know.
No, but Senator Brown.
Yes?
Understand, Let us be realistic. Is you throw the first stone and say the man come from
I don't mind
again.
that, as long as you don't interfere when I start it. Because you jump on me. You jump on me, but you don't jump on them. You jump on Skeffrey, but you don't jump on them.
You're not jumping on me.
In
here.
What? So, Mr. President, I don't like the clause as it is, because I still believe the government is promoting same-sex arrangement.
And again,
Chairman,
Mr. President, it is clear that there is.
Chairman. Clause does not just the polygamous element.
And since when
Senator Knight, you have permission to speak from a seat other than your own. Please do so.
Just that when we are in committee, no seat is assigned. Lord of mercy. I'm Minister, no disrespect, but I was trying to follow something Ransford said, Senator Braham said. Senator Braham, if a trust is established elsewhere to be enforced here, and that clause is there, would the trust fail?
If it is otherwise contrary to the laws of Jamaica, whether by public morality or just a statute or otherwise, the trust would be unenforceable in Jamaica.
So it would fail?
It would, yes. In Jamaica. It would still be good wherever it's coming from.
But suppose the property, some of the property is in Jamaica, what would happen? Would it be a resulting trust? What would happen?
Those are some of it could be a resulting trust, or the settlor would still maintain the ownership, because the settlor usually owns the property, and then he or she then have the object of the trust to be John Brown, Senator Lambert Brown. And because of whatever the reasons, it fails, then it results back to the settlor.
But the settlor may have died.
He may have died. It's
so
a state.
Would it then come under, let's say he died intestate.
Yes.
It would then be administered under the rules of intestacy.
The general law would then become applicable.
Do you see a particular difficulty or in the way in which we are reasoning it, that there are either common law practices or statutory provisions which would cover it?
I believe it will be covered, because similarly, if the trust was a Jamaican trust, which is contrary to public policy, it would similarly fail. And then whether it's a resulting trust or simply it would result to the estate of the person, the settler would apply.
Okay. It's an interesting area that we have to look at.
Tonight, I thought you told me that you fail equity and trust. You didn't tell me that. I thought you told me that you had failed equity and trust. You sound like you're passing.
I didn't have.
Mr. President, can I just
didn't
make
have the opportunity to fail any subject.
Mr. President, just to make sure that the record is clear, I wanted to also just point out that Clause 6 also has a conflict of laws provision, which ensures that, and I particularly refer you to 64B1 Big A, 64B1 Big A on page 11. That actually does say that, it ensures that even if the law of another jurisdiction doesn't recognize personal relationship permitted under the laws of Jamaica, the laws of Jamaica must prevail. So there's a general, as I said, the scheme of the act as it is does not trigger or should not trigger the fears that have been expressed, but we have, of course, by the amendment put forward, sought to put the matter beyond debate by moving the issue of conflict closer to the actual clause, inserting the words. But Clause 5 and Clause 6 deal with the matter.
But the issue that was raised, that issue will be very alive, because if the laws of Jamaica must prevail, then certainly the trust must fail.
Addressing the earlier question.
Oh.
Okay, thank you very much. So can I put the amendment to Clause 2? Those in favor? Again? No problem. Against? The ayes have it. I put Clause 2 as amended. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. Now, I had said before that there are no amendments up until Clause 40. Can I not? I wouldn't put the whole of it, although it says. Can I? Okay. So I would put, with the leave of this honourable committee, the clauses number 3 to 39. Those in favour? Against? Ayes have it. Clause 40, Minister, there is an amendment.
Mr. President, we ask that it be amended in accordance with the item listed. I had given the explanation before that we would simply permit for the renewable periods to be of 3 years as well.
Thank you, Madam. I put the amendment to clause 40. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 40 as amended. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clauses 41 to 43. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. There is an amendment to clause 44 on the amendment sheet.
Yes, Mr. President, and Mr. Chairman, it's proposed that it be approved as is. The issue is the one of compensation, and it is sought to ensure that where another act permits such remuneration, that it be permitted in those circumstances. So if the amendment could be approved.
Thank you very much. I put the amendment to clause 44. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 44 as amended. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clauses 45 to 49. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. There is an amendment on the amendment sheet to clause 50. Minister?
Yes, Mr. President. This is the one that allows for an application to the court to allow for a lien to be issued against real property of a trust.
So I put the amendment to clause 50. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put clauses 51 to 71. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put...
72.
Yes, clause 72. There is an amendment on the sheet to clause 72.
Yes,
Minister?
Mr. President. There are no adjustments to this, to the proposed amendment as stated on the list. The intention is to ensure that the court has ultimate flexibility in ensuring that it assesses the circumstances in which it would impound all or any part of the interest of the beneficiary. So we trust that it addresses the concern that was raised.
So I put the amendment to clause 72 as per the amendment sheet. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put clauses 73 to 96. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report, the question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 6 amendments. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 6 amendments. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for third reading of the bill.
Question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Establishment and Administration of Trusts and for Connected Matters, read a third time and passed.
Minister, an act to amend the bauxite and aluminum industry. Let's go.
You know I'm ready, Mr. President. Always ready. But Mr. President, yes, it is not intended to do any further business today. The question is, Mr. President, that the Senate be adjourned for a day to be fixed.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that this Honourable Senate be adjourned for a day to be fixed. Those in favor? Against? Senate stands adjourned.
There's a long-distance relay that's still on. Many have taken it this far, each leg as important as the next, each challenge faced with determination. Now it's your turn to take the baton. People living with HIV and AIDS and those who are vulnerable need your commitment. It stands in the way of a better quality of life for all of us and our